Hi, everyone. This will be a quick overview of Taxonomy of Metaethics, covering some of the most common metaethical positions, how they relate to each other, and how they're reached. This won't include every metaethical theory. There's quite a few out there. There are different ways of approaching the question and different ways of organizing the different positions that are available. But the one that I'm going to give is, I think, a pretty common one and should be helpful for beginners in particular. So, first of all, we might distinguish what metaethics is from what ethics or normative ethics is. So, one common way of drawing that distinction is to say that ethics or normative ethics is the study of the content of morality. So studying what actions actually are, for example, right or wrong, and why. So well-known examples of ethical theories, normative ethical theories, include utilitarianism, the various types of that, deontology, and virtue ethics. Those are the sort of the three standard families of normative ethical views that you would cover in an introductory ethics class, for example. So metaethics is different. As the name suggests, it asks questions and addresses issues that are more fundamental or in some ways prior to the questions that arise in ethical theory. So one way of thinking about that is to say that metaethics is about the status of morality rather than about the content. So typically, views that count as metaethical are not trying to answer the question, for example, what actions in fact are right or wrong, but rather asking questions about the very nature of rightness and wrongness, asking, are there facts about morality? And if so, where do they come from? What is their nature? So that's a fairly abstract distinction to start with. If it doesn't make sense immediately, it might make more sense when we go through some examples here. A very common traditional way of looking at metaethics is to construct a kind of flowchart. You can find plenty of examples of flowcharts if you just search. And again, you'll find some that are more complex, some that are simpler. But a very common approach to constructing such a chart is to begin with the question, what is the nature of moral judgment? So a moral judgment is anything that expresses some kind of ethical position. It can be something that you think privately, right? Something that you simply hold and don't mention. It can be something that you speak aloud, right, that you actually utter. Examples of moral judgments would be, for example, that murder is wrong, it's good to give to charity, it's bad to betray your friends, so-and-so is a virtuous person. These are all moral or ethical judgments. Now you might say, well, what is the nature of such a judgment? What are those judgments trying to do? And the most common way of drawing a distinction here between two camps is that one side says that those judgments express beliefs. So people who hold this view are called cognitivists. They think that moral judgments are cognitive in the sense that the content that those judgments include appeal to supposed matters of fact. So if I believe that murder is wrong, I'm committed to the view that it is true that murder is wrong. If, for example, I believe that murder was permissible, then presumably that would be a false belief. And in that case, I have a moral judgment that's expressing a belief, but it happens to be one that is not correct. It's a false belief. So if moral judgments do express beliefs, then they're capable of being true or false. That's what a belief is. It's a sort of mental state that can be evaluated as either true or false. And sometimes we might not know which one it is, but it can't be both, right? It's either got to be true or not true, which presumably means false. The other view is that moral judgments actually don't express beliefs at all. What they're really expressing are attitudes, non-cognitive attitudes. That could include things like desire, emotion, possibly preferences. But what all non-cognitivists have in common is the idea that moral judgments are not expressing beliefs in supposed facts, but rather they're expressing desire-like attitudes that the speaker or the person who's making the judgment holds. So, for example, when on this view, if I say that murder is wrong, I'm not really expressing a belief. What I'm really doing is expressing my disapproval of murder, my distaste for it, my sort of negative emotional attitude towards it. The classic philosopher who's associated with non-cognitivist views would be David Hume. And there are still philosophers today who, under various types of approaches to this question, still identify as non-cognitivists in some way, although usually more nuanced than those views used to be. All right, so that's the first question that we might ask. What's the point of moral judgments? What's their nature? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to express beliefs? If you say yes, you're a cognitivist. If you say no, that they're not expressing beliefs, you're a non-cognitivist. You think that the content of moral judgment is non-cognitive, which is to say it's more like a desire, an attitude, a preference, an emotion, something like that. So one thing to notice on the non-cognitive view, moral judgments are neither true nor false. So if I like or dislike something, well, that mere feeling, that mere attitude, isn't properly evaluated as being correct or not. You can't say that my preference for one kind of music over another is true or false. That just doesn't apply. It's just, I just like it, right? And you may share similar taste or not. And non-cognitivists, also sometimes called expressivists, that's what they think morality is like. Okay, so let's take a look at the cognitivist side, because being a cognitivist still raises a lot of questions. So we can still go pretty far down our flowchart here. The next question that you might ask for a cognitivist, somebody who thinks that moral judgments express beliefs, you might ask, well, are any of those beliefs true? Is it ever the case that our moral judgments are correct? And you might think this is an odd question, but the reason that it's a real question is because there is a view that answers no to that. And this view is known as moral error theory. Aptly named because it thinks that all moral judgment is in error. And the reason they think this is that they think, well, there are no moral facts that could make our moral judgments true. Yes, it is the case that some people, in fact, all or most people, believe that certain moral judgments are true, but they're just wrong. Every moral judgment they hold is false because there are no moral facts that could ever make any moral judgment true in the first place. So if I believe that murder is wrong, an error theorist would say, yeah, you believe that, but you're incorrect. It's not true that murder is wrong. It's false, because all moral judgments are false. So you can see here the error theorist disagrees with the non-cognitivist about the nature of moral judgment. The error theorist thinks that moral judgments do express beliefs, but they agree with the non-cognitivist that there are no moral facts that could make those judgments true. So let's say you answer yes to that question. Right? So if you say no, there are no true moral judgments, then you think all morality is an error. You're an error theorist. But maybe you think that some judgments are true. So if you say, yes, some judgments are true, the next question is, well, what makes them true? And here there's a couple ways you might go. You might say, well, they're true in virtue of objective facts that are just outside of the human mind. So these are sometimes called mind-independent facts. So you might think it's just an objective fact that murder is wrong. And what makes that the case, we'll come back to in a minute. But the alternative view is to say that what makes certain moral judgments true are the facts that are constructed by human beings. And this family of metaethical theory is known as constructivism. So constructivists think that moral judgments express beliefs. They think some of those beliefs are true. And they think that those beliefs that are true are so in virtue of facts that humans themselves have somehow constructed. So constructivists think that morality is not something that exists outside of human creation. It's something that we've somehow invented. And there are many different varieties of constructivism. So one type is moral relativism, which thinks that moral truths are relative usually to culture. So through our cultural practices, we construct standards that somehow give rise to facts about what's right or wrong, for example, what's good or bad, what's virtuous or vicious. But a constructivist doesn't have to be a relativist by any means. There are some people who think that Kant, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, was himself a constructivist. And whether or not that's true, there are Kantians today who themselves certainly are constructivists. An example would be the philosopher Christine Korsgaard, who gives an account of practical reason that gets pretty complex. It's interesting. We won't go into the details here, but she argues that morality, although constructed by human beings in a sense, is nonetheless objective and even universal, because the standards of practical reason themselves give rise to these universal standards. So practical reason is a property of thinking beings like humans. If we don't exist, then moral facts themselves don't exist, because moral facts depend upon practical reason on this view. But that doesn't mean that anything goes. There are still strict rules for how you ought to act. There are objective rules on this view about what's right or wrong. It's just those rules, those standards depend upon reason, practical reason. So, okay, suppose you're not a constructivist. Suppose you think that, yes, moral judgments express beliefs. Some of those are true, but you don't think that they're true in virtue of facts that we ourselves have created somehow, that we've constructed. This view is known as moral realism. It's called moral realism because on this view, it's thought that moral facts are real facts, real in the sense of mind independent, outside of our own thinking, not something that depends upon human creation, intervention, perception, anything like that. They're just out there. So they're real facts the same way there are facts about the planet Venus that don't depend upon our knowing them or our thinking about them or our putting them there. They're just our facts about that planet, whether we know it or not. Realists think that morality is similar to that in a lot of ways. There are two main types of moral realism, at least traditionally. So-called naturalists think that moral facts are themselves natural facts. So they're something that's built into the fabric of the universe. Other natural facts would include facts about the mass of an object, for example. And then there are non-naturalist moral realists. So people who think that moral facts, independent of our mind, are not part of the fabric of nature, so to speak. They are facts that exist, but they're non-natural in some way. And here the traditional philosopher that would be associated with this is G.E. Moore, who thought that moral facts, and he talks, for example, about intrinsic value quite a bit. He thought that was a non-natural property that you would need a special faculty of intuition to perceive. So you can see those are two pretty different views. To think that morality depends upon facts that are natural versus the idea that morality depends upon facts that are non-natural. And on this view, you might think, the non-naturalist view, for example, you might think the moral facts come from God or some other kind of supernatural or non-natural source. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of some of the main broad positions that are available in metaethics. Hope it's helpful. It does get potentially confusing, so looking up one of these flowcharts that I mentioned is a decent way to keep your thoughts organized on the matter. All right, I'll talk to you next time.